to not go for the base iPad, the iPad 10 with 64 gig of storage.
Completely disorganized, but that's nothing new for me. But yeah, it's really not.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Sketchwave, our weekly show where we talk all things Procreate and digital art because we're both Procreate tutors here on YouTube. My name is Joel, otherwise known as JoelCreate, and my co-host, as always, is the one and only James Julier. James, how has your week been?
It's been pretty good, yeah. Been quite productive. I'm working on a course at the moment, and it's been occupying all of my time, really, apart from being a parent. But yeah, it's come with its own little aggravations that I've encountered, but we're going to get more into that during this episode. So we'll leave that off the table just for now. How's your week been? Have you been having a busy one, or?
Pretty standard, I think. Yeah. I can't think of any. This is that one question we ask each other every week, and one of us at least goes, "I have no idea what I did for the last week." The whole thing has been fogged over this week by looking after a puppy of my mum's while she's away, and it's crazy. I forget how much work it takes. My two now being 5 and 7, it's just a long time away from that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's been a bit of a headache. Before we carry on though, do you want to just explain a little bit about the course and what people can do currently? Because we haven't really spoken about it much.
Sure. Yeah, it's a course that is designed to just be more in depth than the usual YouTube stuff that I do, because I normally try to limit it to under an hour for a tutorial. And it tends to be a fairly sort of whistle stop tour through the basics, and the images can be quite pleased with the images usually in YouTube, but they lack a little bit of refinement. So this is a chance to just go a bit more depth in terms of refinement and some of the kind of foundational stuff required. So yeah, there's a course that's due out at the end of this month, November, and there's a waiting list that people can sign up for too.
Oh, cool. We'll put a link to that in the description down below.
Brilliant.
Now, as always, the episode is going to be split up into a couple of different sections. We've got our main topic as well as then a quick look at our previous tutorials as well that we've released in the last week. However, did you know that we now have membership? If you want to get early access to the show, as well as a loyalty badge beside your name that grows over time the longer you are a supporter, as well as access to a few exclusive posts, you can now become a member of the channel.
And if that's something you're interested in, there's a link down in the video description, or you can press the join button that's next to the subscribe, and you can start getting early access, because we do tend to film these quite early, a good week in advance, so there will be early access. Maybe not full week, but certainly early access, which might be interesting for those people.
Awesome. So let's get into the gripe that you've got this week.
Yeah, it's just file size. I've got quite a big storage iPad. I mean, it's, what is it, lost track of the numbers now, 512, isn't it? It goes 256 and then 512, yeah, which is a lot of storage, I think. It's the biggest storage iPad I've ever had. But part of the problem is that I've been filming lots of 4K video for the course, and there's lots of videos all stored at the same time, active files that are being edited within the editing software. I use LumaFusion, and I'm storing the actual videos that I've filmed to. But then all the Procreate files are not small, and you can imagine, well, you're the same. You've been doing this for years now, and we don't delete them, because why would we want to do that? We want to keep them, don't we, forever? As I'm sure a lot of people that follow along probably keep their Procreate files too. So they've just really started to kind of log up the system, really, and so it's become a bit of a juggling act. I've had an external storage for quite a number of years now anyway, but honestly before now it's just been for kind of collecting movies that I've downloaded and things like that. It's never been part of my workflow before, but I'm starting to realize that it's probably going to need to be part of my workflow from this point on, I think, because there's so many situations now, so many times where I've found that I've got 10 gig left of my storage, and the whole system grinds up, really. It doesn't work properly. As soon as you've not got the space, it struggles to do the basics. I mean, how do you manage with space? What's your
Well, my iPad is a 256 gig,
Yeah.
and I've had it since 2019.
Hmm.
My iPad itself is fine because my iPad is just used for Procreate and sort of consumption of, say, like YouTube and films.
Yeah.
But most of the time, that's streaming content, not necessarily downloaded anything. So I'm pretty good on storage at the minute. I mean, I've actually had a look earlier before our recording, and my iPad Procreate sort of size on the iPad consumes about 63 gig. So
Yeah.
it's not that bad at all, considering we draw multiple times a week, multiple versions of the same design and so on.
Yep.
So it's not been too bad on that part. But also, I guess there's multiple factors, isn't there, that can come into it. But when you say about managing storage, the one thing I have to manage a lot of the time, though, is my MacBook, because that just gets clogged up in exactly the same reason as yours. 4K footage all the time, and just constantly moving it off of there onto different devices,
Yeah.
which we will touch on in a second. But as I was saying, there's lots of different reasons, isn't there, that your file sizes can get larger and larger and also consume more and
Definitely.
more content. I mean, do you know off the top of your head, or did you have a look about how much storage is being taken up by Procreate on your device?
It's tricky at the moment because currently, I mean, I've got less than 10 gig on my current
That's not
iPad,
bad.
but then I've got my old iPad that I haven't traded in yet. I've been reluctant to. When I first bought it, it's such a laborious process to transfer all of the artwork from Procreate across, and it said it would take like 24 hours or something to do that. And I wanted my iPad immediately to work on it, so I just skipped that step. And so the iPad's been sat in a drawer, and I need to cash it in because I need the money, frankly, from it. But I've just not got around to doing it yet, and I've not looked how much space that will take up. But I haven't got space at the moment without deleting a lot of stuff. I know that the typical file size when I create a tutorial is around the 80 to 100 megabyte. And that's something I know because we create notes before the show, and I noted the average file size that your Procreate files take up a bit less, don't they? And I guess that comes down to choices of canvas size
Yeah.
and other things, doesn't it? I mean, on that front, what canvas size do you generally use? That might be an
So my
interesting.
canvas size is normally 2000 by 2000. That's pretty much standard
Right.
procedure across most tutorials. I quite like the square aspect ratio.
Yeah.
And as you said, mine work out about 40 to 60 megabytes per canvas.
Yes.
So that mathematically works out because I think your canvas is the A4 one, isn't it?
A4,
Which is bigger than 2000, at least on
Must
one
be,
of the
yeah.
axes.
Yeah.
I think
don't
it
have the
worked out.
pixels to hand, but yeah, it is more than that. It must be because I think out of the two of us, you probably use more layers typically than I do. So, layers account for a lot of the space, don't they? So, seeing as I'm not
Your
using as many layers, I don't know whether I'm not
that is a
sure.
fact. That's definitely going to be a factor. But your canvas size, for example, is 2,480 by
There you go.
3,508. So
Yeah.
it's almost on one axis anyway, almost double the
Yeah.
size. So that would work out quite consistent for our canvas sizes, and then the file size
Yeah,
of
makes
them.
sense.
I think there's other factors as well, though, isn't there? Because I think it depends on how you share the file. So of course, if you're just sharing a JPEG of the finished design, you're
That's
probably
minimal.
looking
10
megabytes, something like that. It's
at
pretty
most,
standard
probably.
procedure.
Yeah.
And then, but if you're sharing the, say, Procreate file, which has additional information in there, you're going to be sharing far more than that. For example, also, you'll be combining in there a time lapse as well.
Yes.
And I think for some people, we're kind of having this conversation for a couple of reasons, aren't we? One, just general solutions that we have found for this kind of thing. But also, I think it's just like a bit of a public service announcement, really, in a sense, to be like, every time you create a canvas and you're drawing, it is recording all the sort of video side of all of that.
That's by default, isn't it? Yeah.
That is by default. And I believe you can even configure sort of the resolution of the time lapse as well to, much larger sizes than you definitely don't need. But it's a factor that some people should ask themselves. If you're drawing very frequently and you have an iPad with quite limited storage, go into the settings and turn off the time lapse
Yes,
feature. It's
definitely.
just not necessary, because unless it's a critical part of your social media plan or anything like that, then I would definitely turn it off. I mean, I don't even know the last time I shared a time lapse replay of something that
No,
Procreate recorded. I don't know about yourself.
no, but I'm aware that people that do download the files, because I always provide them after I've uploaded to on Patreon. I'm aware I've had comments where I think I've uploaded. Excuse me. I've uploaded the Photoshop file, because I do a PSD file and the Procreate file to download, just in case anyone hasn't got an iPad and isn't following along with Procreate, but is still trying to figure it out. But I've had comments when, on the odd occasion, where I think Patreon used to have a file size limit of things you could attach. And I think sometimes the Procreate file would exceed that limit, and it's a bigger
Right.
file generally than the PSD file. But people have said that they like to have the time lapse replay. I think it perhaps just, you know, rather than watching the video, they can just slide backwards and forwards and see it evolve,
Mm,
which I guess is interesting. For us, it's like we know it, but without actually watching all the video and listening to it, you can quickly get to the point on a time lapse. Perhaps is
mm.
part of the
I
appeal for
wonder if
some
that's
people.
something that sort of contradicts the editing in a way. Like, so if you're doing a particular
Sometimes, yeah,
piece and you're sort of, and you 2x it, do you speed, you speed up certain elements of the
bits of
design?
it, yeah.
Yeah. So I guess in those types of situations where the video has been sped up, maybe they want to go back and see every
Yeah,
granular piece of
yeah,
brushstroke, I guess, through the process. I have all. I always. This is my job on a day-to-day basis, is to consider like user A, B, C, and different routes that they will use different things. It's like Instagram, where, you know, you say to different people, "What do you use Instagram for?" And
yeah.
like, I never use stories. I never look at stories on my personal Instagram. But
Hmm.
there's some people I know, like my missus. She only watches Instagram stories. She never scrolls the feed, and we're completely the opposite. And then there's
Yeah.
like all the other things you can do in the app, but this is like kind of one of those scenarios where I find it quite interesting, because I personally wouldn't necessarily look at the time lapse replay and
No.
get too much value out of it, but there is definitely a use case to say that there is value in it, and
Yeah.
going through and sort of holding your finger in the right position and then saying,
They'll
okay, this
also
is where he got to.
exactly. They'll also get to see all the mistakes that en
Oh
route
yeah,
to get
true.
there. You know, because they won't be edited out like they normally are in the video. So
I
you
never
know,
thought about that.
yeah,
Maybe you'll have to download the time lapse replay and then just chop out all of those sections alongside alongside your actual
yeah,
YouTube version.
yeah,
Yeah, I never thought about that. Wow, yeah. Oh, but then I guess that's just like that extra level of content that people want from you to be able to see. I mean, I've said this quite a lot in tutorials recently, where there are certain things that will pop up and I'll say, I'm just going to leave this in
yeah,
because, and I say it in the commentary to be like, I want you to also understand what I'm also looking for as
hmm,
mistakes, what
yeah,
not to look for, what not to do. Because I typically, I'll get to the end of the video and I'll have like a 5 minute section where I call it final adjustments, where I will go back through and I will just, you know,
yeah.
say, this has just been winding me up for the last hour. I want to go back in and change it. Um, and again, I hope that they also see that and go, do you know what? He's right. That doesn't necessarily make too much sense.
Yeah.
I'll fix it in mine as well. I think it's
There's
quite
definitely lessons
educational,
in that.
not only
There
to
is,
do
yeah, yeah,
what to do, but also what not
yes,
to do, which
and how
we
to
don't
fix
really get too
problems.
much time to do we?
Yeah, fixing problems. You know, demonstrating how to work around things, and if you've made a mistake, how to go back and remedy it. I think is just as informative as, you know, an absolutely perfect tutorial that is flawless is great, but then I think there's definitely merit to almost like sitting on someone's shoulder and just seeing how they work. I think
Mm.
there's advantage to that as well. Anyway, we're going off the beaten track here a little bit, aren't we? With
But you
the main
actually have, well, true, yeah. But you
point.
actually have a part of your Patreon, don't you, at a certain tier, which people can have a call with you, where you could actually
Yeah.
get that kind of one-to-one critique
Yes.
almost if required.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. It's not been a huge numbers thing. I mean, I don't know how I'd juggle my time if it were.
True.
You know, if there were, if there were too much uptake of it. But yeah, there have been of the few years that I've been offering that. There's been a few people that have been able to help, which is really interesting. It's really fun to see people's personal projects and um, be able to sort of advise them on that and just step aside from the tutorials a little bit. But yeah, I mean, do you store all your Procreate things just on your iPad? Do you not back them up anywhere, or
Yeah,
do you transfer
just
them?
on the well, I'll tell you how my process works, where there is an element of a backup. So I do
Yeah.
store them on the iPad, and they just sort of live there. However, so when I finish my recording of a tutorial, I'll
Mm.
grab the camera, I'll grab the footage off of it, plug it into the laptop, and then move that footage across. At the same
Yeah.
time, I will also move across into a folder on my SSD. Sorry about the noise.
Hmm.
My SSD. I will create a folder, and then I will send the palette. I'll send any brushes that I used in that weren't built in. I
Yeah.
will send the Procreate file as well as a JPEG,
Yeah.
so that if that iPad gets soaked in water tomorrow, I've got all of the files, everything I would need in order to still publish the tutorial, maybe even go back through and re-add it onto a new iPad. So if there wasn't an
Yeah.
iCloud backup of it. So that's how my kind of backup process works. And that's obviously because we have a bit of a process where we've got the tutorials to make and so on. So
Yeah.
having that as part of our journey, I think, is quite a key thing to do. Actually, talking about the differences in our process, this might be one as well. Do you ever do that, or is it just kept on the iPad?
It's just kept on the iPad. I mean, I just realised, because I do post them on Patreon, there's a backup of all of the
True.
Procreate files there, because I've provided them as downloadable things, so I could delete them all. But it's one of those, isn't it? I quite like having things to hand on the iPad, because that's the native home where they were created, and I like to have them there in the gallery. They're completely disorganized, but that's nothing new for me. But yeah, it's not really not. But yeah, I don't tend to get rid of them. I don't tend to put them anywhere else. But I'm considering at this point that perhaps that might be a good option. I've got an
Mm,
external storage as well. It's just a plug-in with the USB C. But I guess you can get anything. You can get SD cards or anything, couldn't you? Really,
true.
it's not limited to just that.
Well, let's get into the list of our
Yeah.
solutions that we've got here, because there's a few different things you could do. The first being quite savage in a way is maybe just, if you've got no other options, just go back through and start deleting some
Mm.
old files, whether they were sketch files that you never used or anything like that, or just older works. I mean, to be fair, I wouldn't advise this, but
No.
this is in case you have no other option. Go
Can
back through and delete them.
I don't think with a file, because it saves. Does it automatically delete all of the old? Like, if you flatten it and merge it all into one layer, for example, and then it's saved as that file, does it reduce the size of that Procreate file, or does, because it has a memory of what went before, stay as a larger file? I don't know how it
I think the
functions really.
file size would be smaller because there's
Yeah,
only one layer in terms of
it's
a
deleted
Procreate
it.
file, but it
Might
it
be
wouldn't
minimal.
even, in the current file type that we have, it wouldn't even remember that you flattened it to then,
No,
so it wouldn't preserve the layers in like a undo, because
no.
like Photoshop, for example, you can go way down
Oh,
the
yeah,
line,
yeah,
and if you flattened all your layers, you could just Control Z and go all the way back,
yeah.
and those
Okay.
layers are still retained in memory. Again, this is something we're alluding to that we're going to talk about sort of
Yeah.
later on, but that's in the current file type
Mm.
of the Procreate files. The
So it
other
might be one
alternative,
option. It might be one option. If they know you're not going to
absolutely,
work on it anymore, you could just flatten all of the
yeah.
files that layers down, couldn't you, into one layer?
Yeah, absolutely. Another one is then to just move it to your computer. If you've got a
Yeah.
computer that's solely just used for browsing the web and it's got a good amount of storage on it, just move it across. Use something like, obviously it's dependent on what iPad you've got, but just maybe like a USB C to USB C cable into the bottom of your iPad, or Lightning to USB C, or whatever, USB A into your computer, and you can just share the files across. You'd have to download them to, say, your files on your iPad, and then share them across, and it will be different depending on if you've got a Windows machine. So I'm not going to get into all the technicalities of that, but moving them off device onto another device that you maybe don't
Yeah.
use is maybe a good idea. I mean, a lot of people don't even use all the storage on their phone, and you could
True.
easily just use your phone as if it was a memory bank
True.
and move stuff to your phone and get it off your iPad, which you maybe use for much more intense
Yeah.
projects. But there's much better options to move your files. The first one I would recommend is like a cloud storage solution, so like a
Yeah.
Dropbox or a Google Drive. By the way, I'll leave a link in the description down below to a video I've literally made on this entire kind of topic of backing up and restoring your content once you've backed it up to a different platform. So make sure if you're a bit confused about it or want a bit of a demo, that'll be linked in the description. But something like a Dropbox. So Dropbox is just a website you can sign up to. It's an online file kind of storage, and you get a free amount of storage when you sign up. Likewise, Google Drive. Most people don't realize that when you create like a Gmail account, you get 30 gig of storage that you can
pretty
use
decent.
to upload completely for free, and it's quite cheap to upgrade your storage. But then you get into the fact of if you're going to constantly keep pushing the ladder and the limit and the ceiling of your cloud storage, you will end up paying quite a lot in the long run. Have you ever sort of used any online file storage like that?
I have done. I've got iCloud, but it's more just for me, just a backup in case the machine dies or gets stolen. You know, I've had things that are stolen in the past. But yeah, I don't tend to transfer things in order to free up space. But I think perhaps moving into the future, that might be something I have to consider. Yeah.
Another option, like I showed earlier, is to go ahead and grab yourself one of these. These are SSDs. They are tiny little memory hard drives, but they're not hard drives anymore. They're SSDs, which mean they're solid state drives, meaning they are very, very fast. There's no moving parts. And you can use a hard drive. They're much, much cheaper. They're a lot chunkier. I've actually got a drawer of them, actually, right here.
Give them away.
Yeah. Here is, look at the difference between these
I've
two.
got one of the old ones. Yeah, I need to get a new one like you've got.
But so I'll just explain why I've got those as well as the SSDs, because how my journey works is this is constantly looped into the back of my Mac. So it's just attached on the back, constantly attached by USB-C, and it's always there as my extra bit of storage to move stuff off of my Mac to keep it running nice and smooth and have it, like I said, have it off of there.
Yeah.
Then what happens is once that fills up, because that's a 2 terabyte, I've got a massive hard drive that I would then move all of that footage off of there onto the hard drive, and that just goes in a drawer, doesn't get used unless it's just like a real resource of just backup data. Then that means that this is clean again, ready to go, 2 terabytes, and I can carry on again. So there's like a day every, I don't know, 4 or 5 months where I just have to drag it across first thing in the morning, and just because it's a hard drive and it's quite slow, I just have to leave it and it just ticks over, moving everything over bit by bit by bit. So that's kind of how my process goes. And that drawer is actually full of hard drives at really large capacities, but just there just to, again, have that all as huge backups. Because the problem, if you were to pay for all of that storage online, terabytes and terabytes, it's way, way more expensive to pay for all of that online than it is to have a physical copy that I can also access all the time. No download required from the web or anything like that. So if you can get hold of one of those SSDs, there's loads available. And by the time we're releasing this will be the 19th of November. And I believe Black Friday in the US is just around the corner.
Yeah.
As well as Christmas, of course, is just around the corner as well. So there should be some pretty good deals. I mean, I looked at this one and I think it was 170, 180 normal price, but it's down to like 130 already, 120.
Yeah.
So there's already a good little saving on them. It's in the UK anyway, but if you can grab yourself one of those, that will plug straight into the bottom of your iPad by USB-C. Of course, please triple check your device to make sure
it's like got
that
a little plug on it then, direct onto it. Doesn't need a cable.
It does need a cable. It's got a very tiny USB-C on the end there, and then you get a very short little cable with it as well. So that's just enough that I can wrap it into the back of behind the screen in like these little stick-on pouches, and then into the side. So, but something like that, I would highly, highly recommend, because also a lot of your iPads have got very fast transfer speeds, especially if you've got one of the Pro models. So moving them across onto there would not take very long at all. So that would be my optimum decision to do. Do you mess with any SSDs at all?
I haven't done for years, no. No, I think I might have to look into that, because I have deleted, what have I deleted now? I've deleted some things, I mean, what I tend to do when I've edited the tutorials is I don't keep a backup of the actual video once I've edited
Mm,
it. I upload it and delete it. Um,
okay.
but it'd be quite nice to have a high resolution copy of it backed up that I can then, you know, put somewhere else other than YouTube if I needed to in the future. But yeah, I think there are ways of downloading from YouTube if you're the content owner, but
Yeah.
I'm not. Yeah, so yeah, I'm not been too worried about it. I think we tend to trust and rely upon these big institutions rather a lot, don't we? We trust that iCloud's not going to mess up and delete all our things. We trust that YouTube, when we've uploaded there, is going to permanently keep a good record of all our content. But actually, I think it's probably a sensible plan, isn't it, to have a second option, another backup, just to make it
Mm.
extra secure. Aside from space, aside from that issue, just having it backed up there is probably quite sensible for most people.
Oh, that is exactly why I have all of them because
Yeah,
I want those original tutorial files
yeah,
pre-uploaded onto YouTube because the video when it's shot in 4K etc can probably get to like 80 to 100 gigs sometimes.
wow,
And so when it's rendered, it renders out at like 4 to 5 gig. So
yes,
it's a 95 gig save it. And then I'll delete the
yeah,
original video file because that's not necessary anymore. I've got
no,
the finished version anyway. I don't need I don't need me swearing at myself and being like, mate, you really messed that up. You got to go back and do it all again.
yeah,
Um, don't need any of that. So then you end up with quite small files that are
yeah,
just available. I say small, they're still quite large, but smaller versions anyway that are just available in case, like you said, in case we ever needed to move to a different platform or whatever
yeah,
it may be. But this all kind of also leans into the fact that the Apple pricing ladder, as a lot of people like to call
yeah,
it, and MKBHD especially, because what typically happens with all of the iPads is, and this maybe goes out to the few people that are thinking of upgrading to a new iPad from the current one they've got, storage just costs a fortune. It
yeah,
costs so much in when you're buying the device, it's going to cost you a lot of money. However, the one biggest piece of advice I think we have is to not go for the base iPad, the iPad 10 with 64 gig of storage.
no.
That's
Not if you're a
far too
content
low.
creator. You know, if you're planning on creating lots of images in Procreate, you know, and other things, because I don't imagine there's too many people that only use the iPad for just Procreate. I mean, it might be what you do as a content creator, but most people won't have it because of a channel or anything like that. So they'll be doing multiple things with it and storing lots of other
Mm,
things. But 60, I mean, the operating system takes up, I don't know, 10 gig of that 64 as well. You know, it must be. Um, and as soon as you start storing any amount of photos, and what tends to happen these days is that anything you've taken on on your phone, if they're connected, it automatically kind of duplicates everything. I know you can switch that off, but it very quickly. I mean, that's another way that I kind of I see the security in things too. Is like when you take a load of family pictures on your phone and then it puts you on your iPad. It is like a backup there too, but
mm.
that means that you get so much storage that I mean I've been going through. Sorry, I'm meandering a little bit, but going through like especially on the phone because they're all kind of interconnected with Apple products, aren't they? Going through the phone and looking at attachments that have been sent on text messages, and it's like 6 or 7 gigs worth of attachments that were connected to text messages, and it was like, blimey, So then I just ended up having to delete all of the attachments that were, there was just years worth of videos that I'd sent to, my sister and my family and other things, just little family, snapshots and videos of the kids and stuff, um, which you want to keep, but it's always a little bit of a concern, isn't it? You worry about deleting things because you don't know whether that's the one precious video, one precious memory that you might want to refer back to. But I find I'm
Mm.
having to be quite ruthless. And if it was 64 gig like the iPad, I just don't think I could. I can't imagine being able to cope with only 64 gig. And I guess it's different for us because we are creating such, you know, intensive video editing or just the Procreate files, because we do it every week. But if you follow any number of tutorials and have family photos and family videos on your iPad. 64 gig is nothing, is it? You're going to burn through
No.
that in no time at all.
But there's also people that I see on Instagram every single week, and within a week, they have posted my tutorial, your tutorial, a flow
Yeah,
tutorial, a Tati Works tutorial, and
yeah,
so on. And so, if anything, potentially their output in terms of the amount of Procreate content is equally the same, if not more,
yeah,
of how much content that they're
yeah.
making every
Could be
single week
300
following our tutorial.
megabytes a week. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that point, you're going to fill it up so fast.
Oh, that's nuts to think that like in a
Yeah,
month you could just do a gig of
yeah.
content that quickly, and
Mhm.
that's when we were talking about this just before we started the recording. I couldn't believe that the base iPad still only has 64
Yeah.
gigabytes of storage. Please try and avoid that if you
I think
can. Like,
I think that would be almost okay if it's the first iPad you've ever owned and there's
mm,
nothing to transfer across. But as soon as you go to your second or your third or your fourth iPad, there's a ton of things that you're going to transfer across from the old iPad. And it like you say, it becomes you're stuck on this treadmill, this ladder system of, well, I've gotten used to a 256 gigabyte iPad, and I was near the end of that. So the next one I'm going to have to get is a 512, and it kind of
yeah.
it goes upward from there, doesn't it? Really, it's crazy, but
Well, that's the next step up for the base iPad is 256 gig. So there's no
is there no
128
128?
anymore.
Oh, blimey, gosh, yeah.
Jump straight up there. So this is
Ooh.
where the ladder is so enticing. There's always something just a tiny bit more expensive, just a one tiny step up the ladder. And there's lots of tiny steps because then at that point you say to yourself, well, if it was £330 in the UK for the base iPad at 64 gig, then you're saying, well, it's 480 for the 256 gig
Right.
base iPad. At that point, you have a conversation with yourself and go, well, if I take a look at the iPad Air and I want to go ahead and buy that instead, what's the base price from that?
There
Well,
you
it's
go.
5.9, and then before you know it, you're like, well, it's 599, but it does come with 128 gigs,
That
so
comes with
I
less
could get the
storage, yeah.
better iPad, but it's more
Yeah.
than 126. And then you're like, well, and then before you know it, you're just well and truly like climbing that
Yes.
ladder, climbing the price brackets, which is why I think something like these SSDs are quite valuable because
Yeah.
no matter what you do in the future, that's yours. You own
Yep.
that. It's always it's if you get something that's quite fast now, you future proof yourself. You'll have it available for you throughout all your iPads that you'll buy because USB-C shouldn't go anywhere for quite some time now. But that will be with you, and you'll be able to always have a backup of your content locally. And now because most of the new iPhones as well are USB-C, that can go across your phone, your
Yeah.
iPad. You can have it available to you at all times. So that's one thing to consider, and also the fact that iCloud is just going to get more and more expensive
Yes.
going forward. So that's something to consider. I mean, I was thinking about this. I was thinking about it during the week anyway, and then it's just perfect that we've brought this topic up for this week because I was thinking, how cool would it be to have your files where you open up the Procreate home screen and then you've got all of your files, but if you drew something on your phone, that the canvas is also there on your iPad when you open it up, and vice versa. You open up Procreate Pocket on your phone and your canvases are all there. But to be honest, I would probably happily sacrifice paying monthly and avoiding having the cloud storage because at the end of the day, it's just on your phone and it's not quite the usability as it does on your iPad. So that would be the main difference. Also, there's one thing to consider with this entire topic, which is why I think it's really important that we have brought it up when we've brought it up. We actually spoke about the Procreate 5.4 updates that are coming,
Mm.
both end of this year and also new features coming in 2025, we hope, that they've already pre-announced. Now, if you want to, you can check out that. I'll leave a link to it in the description down below where we went through all of the features that
Yeah.
they released in a press release. So if you want to check that out, I'll leave a link to it at the very end of the video as well. But Procreate files are going to be changing like considerably. At the minute, when you create a canvas, it's your canvas size that you want, and then the subsequent amount of layers that you can use is based off of the RAM of your device. RAM will hold all of that information in memory for you. However, with how they're changing the file type, the canvas size is going to be able to go 1 million by 1 million pixels,
Yeah.
which is just insane. And there's no way that can be held in RAM. So it's going to be
No.
held within the file type. So I
Yep.
think the file types and the canvas size expansion, the files are going to be huge. I mean,
Yeah.
2000 by 2000 is roughly 50 megabytes. I
Hmm.
don't even. I'll put the math on screen. It's going to be massive, like 1 million by 1 million, roughly, with the same amount of layers. It could even be more than that. So yeah, I think we should be aware of these things going forward,
Yeah.
just because then we can tackle that situation when it comes, and be aware of possible solutions. It's not something you may need to act on now, but when they do change it, potentially this is how that may run and play out. Do you, when they bring out these larger canvas sizes in the new update, do you think that's something you'll ever move to, or you'll stick to what you know?
I don't think it's necessary. I mean, certainly not within the confines of our tutorials, you know.
Mm,
I mean, there might be some project that I may end up working on where it needs to be printed or somehow zoom inable to really the nth degree, but I just can't imagine that within the confines of a YouTube tutorial that a million a million by a million pixels, or is it a million total? What was the
yeah,
configuration?
million by a million. I think was it. No, was it? Oh, you might. That's a good question.
It can't
Was
be
it a
because that's
million
like
by a million or 1 million
1,000 billion at
pixels?
that point, isn't it? Something pixels. It won't be that many.
I'll
Um,
Google it while we carry on.
yeah, I mean, I just can't imagine that it would ever need to be that large. It's almost just a preposterous. I mean, to go from 2 or 3 thousand, in any direction to have even 100,000 in a direction seems insanely huge, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So, um, no, I don't think it'll make any difference. I think I quite like the format that I'm used to. You're quite used to the square format, so I'm quite used to the kind of A4 rectangular. So I end up with a portrait orientation or a landscape orientation.
Mm,
I quite like that. It works for the kind of for me for the because I always have the iPad screen as my thumbnail, and the image always fills the screen in one of the directions. So
mm.
I'll probably just stick because it's almost the A4 is very similar to the screen size because it comes with one of
Yeah.
those as default too, doesn't it? I mean,
Mm.
if I had the time again, I probably would just have picked that because it would actually fit the thumbnail better. It's always a bit of a squash to A4. I have to crop it and trim it or stretch it or manipulate it somehow. So if I had the time again, I'd probably, I could still change at any point, but I'm not going to change to a million pixels. It's just bonkers. It
It
doesn't
was a
make any
million
sense.
by a million.
I don't even know what is that mathematically.
I don't even
Yeah.
know. I'll put it on screen. It'll be underneath us now. It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's just, also, like, I think it would really mess with your usual understanding of the brush sizes, because they're
Yeah.
just going to be nowhere near, unless there's going to be some sort of mathematical equation that they're then going to scale them up accordingly based on the canvas size. But if they don't do that, when you go in for your 10% brush
It's
size,
true.
it's going to
Yeah.
be nothing in comparison to that
No.
canvas. So many questions, and something we can definitely, I'm so looking
Yeah.
forward to when it comes out, and that's just really getting into it and breaking it down and
I think we'll need to do
seeing.
some content people understand it, won't
Oh,
we? To help ourselves
absolutely.
understand it between us, so
So make sure to subscribe to the channel so
yes.
you're ready for all of that content. But at this point in the video, we always take a look back through our tutorials that we've released in the last week. We've not done this for a little while,
Yeah.
just because of the deep dives we've done.
Mhm.
So it's a chance now to take a look back at a few of our tutorials. Now, James, yours is up first. I've got your tutorial
Okay.
from this week on YouTube.
Yes.
Talk me through that one.
I just wanted to I'm not finished with the autumn, the fall
Mhm.
theme, but it's trying to reinvigorate it. So I've done lots of kind of autumn landscapes, and it's trying to put a different spin on it, really. So I thought I'd lean heavily into the kind of Studio Ghibli anime kind of aesthetic. So I did quite a bit of research, finding images that could serve as inspiration. Um, yeah, I just really wanted a really really colourful kind of a blue sky that is almost preposterously blue. Certainly, but it would be in the UK anyway. Maybe if you live in LA, it's not quite like that. But where we live, we don't see that kind of blue, do we? If it's not on a screen. Um, so yeah, I just wanted to push the saturation of the colours really far, and I'm really enjoying drawing trees at the moment as well. I've been doing it on the course that I've been creating. And obviously I do quite a lot of trees generally anyway, but I'm really starting to find a method that works for me, and it can be quite simplified, and it can be quite it's stylized in a way, but I like to add the depth of foliage that is behind branches and behind the trunk, and then sort of layer that up even before you do the foreground one, so it really gives it that kind of dimensionality. I think that's a word. Yeah, so I really enjoyed doing this one. I did, and it doesn't really stand up. The extended version is going to be necessary to fine tune some of the details that have ended up being a bit kind of rainforest brush extravaganza in the kind of some of the trees, some of the background trees, that is. But for the actual,
Okay.
I took inspiration from one of the conversations we had, and I used oh blimey, my mind's gone blank now. What the evolve brush
Oh
for
yeah.
the main tree. It's a really good brush. I mean, it's almost taken on a kind of computer game pixely look.
Mm.
It's and I've noticed that when I've seen other people's versions on Facebook and stuff when they've been posting it, which I kind of like. It's perhaps a little bit hard edged, maybe, and it hasn't quite got the softness of real foliage. Perhaps it's very stylized, but I like the brush, so
Mm.
I'm going to have to try and figure out a way of making it a little softer, but not quite as soft as the rainforest brush. I need a mixture between the two, and I don't think it exists on Procreate. I could probably create the brush, but I try to use the default ones as much as I can.
Mm.
But yeah, it's try because I do think that a lot of people comment that they're appreciative for the fact I only use the Procreate brush. We've had this
I
conversation. Do
get that a
you
lot as well.
mainly? Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I think people just don't want the extra hassle of having to go and search and download things, and even if it's free and you're offering it for free, I think just the inconvenience of not having it there on your iPad ready to use. I think people appreciate it being there ready to go straight away. So I try to use the default brushes as much as possible. But then they have limits, don't they? They have limitations. You can push it
Mm.
and push it and push it, but then it could be with the update. I think they're talking about having more brushes, um, and that would be nice if they could do more in the category of foliage and things like that. That would be awesome.
Mm.
But
Yeah.
we'll see. But then I guess we've got a problem. Going off another tangent, but if whether people have the latest version of Procreate, then don't we?
Oh
You know,
yeah.
if we end up with new brushes that aren't part of the you know
Mm.
the old Procreate, but we'll see. That's a problem for the future, isn't it? Yeah. But yeah, I enjoyed doing that one. That was a good fun one for me to do.
I think people also like to see how the Procreate built-in brushes can be used.
Yeah.
I guess a lot of the time, some creators will build a brush just for a sole purpose, and that's it. And
Hmm.
rather than try to use something that is built in, and so you just end up skipping over all of them. But I mean, I've got my second channel, which is Joel Designs, which is always using different apps like Infinite
Yeah.
Painter and High Paint, and their brush libraries just don't stand up. Like they don't stand
Right.
up, and I think unless people have used those other apps and are aware of how limited some of their built-in libraries are,
Mm.
we don't realize how good the built-in ones
Yeah.
are in Procreate and how many in each category as well, just to create all the different types of content we want, whether it's just a texture overlay or actually like a solid shape, like you said, like to create the leaves in the trees and stuff. So yeah,
Yeah.
I'm fully aware of how good the library is, and
Yeah.
wanting to, like you say, wanting to use them as much as possible. I mean, I just recorded one today, and it crossed my mind at one point because there's two brushes that again I'm giving away for free. They're just anyone can use them, but
Yeah.
I'm immediately like, that's kind of annoying because that's a bit of a hindrance. And I mean, it does come out on Patreon, so maybe it's a slightly different kind of vibe with
Audience.
the
Yeah.
audience in a
Yeah.
sense. But yeah, it's interesting to see that kind of mindset change in yourself of being like, yeah, I
Mhm.
know, I actually want to focus more on the built-in ones. You said it looks quite rainforesty at the back. That back forest area, I love it. Like there's so much
Thank
going
you.
on there in terms of like data and small hue changes and everything like that. I love it. I think it looks awesome. And
Oh, thank you.
I really love the Blue Hill then behind that one more as well, and it almost looks as if you've said, and being this is quite a bold thing for some people to do, and people are not kind of brave enough necessarily to do it. To me, I interpret it as that bright side right in front of us. So we're looking at the third layer back, the blue hill just beyond the river by the looks of it. But looks like you've put like a big dark area of blue over there, as if it's like an overcast area where a cloud is blocking the sun and casting that shadow onto the land. And some people find that quite a sort of, maybe it's quite destructive, maybe, and saying, well, I'm covering up all the colors and detail I put there. But it looks so much better. It always looks really impressive when people do that, in my opinion, just actually sacrificing part of the design. And you've done that in multiple sections, even with the foreground as well, where the trees are blocking the light from above, giving you that nice autumnal.
The contrast is nice sometimes. The key for that, is what you were saying, is to start with the dark color and then add the sunlight in after. So I started with the dark blue and then added the light green. So it feels like positively adding it rather than taking it away.
It's a good way of putting it. So it's actually part of the structure. I love it. Yeah, and I totally agree as well. I think November for me is a really nice time of year where you do those autumnal and carry them on a little bit more before, for us, we get into like the wintry, snowy scenes. I know for our friends on the other side of the earth, it's a completely different vibe, and the swim shorts are out. But over here, it's absolutely freezing. So we can't help but be inspired by the cold weather kind of aesthetic.
And your latest one is kind of autumn inspired as well, isn't it?
I've got two.
One. Yes.
Yeah, so I've got the YouTube one. This is part of a trio of tutorials.
Okay.
Which I'm referring to as wet landscapes. Now I'm calling them wet landscapes because there are elements of them, and I've said this in the actual recordings, that are watercolor to a degree. However, I have not followed typical principles of watercolor, nor do the brushes either. It's more the smudging kind of wet canvas aesthetic that I really find quite pretty, and also allows for some really kind of rainy, misty kind of scenes. We'll see one next week here on the show when we do a look at our tutorials again, because it's the first one I did in the trio, but it's the second one that's releasing. So the one that you're seeing on screen now is the first one that I released, and this one's on YouTube. And that kind of inspiration of like Japanese style ink designs, where bold strokes, very simple, kind of like as if you've got those almost fountain pen style strokes to the screen. I mean, I even said at the end of the tutorial, for example, in the water at the bottom, I put some horizontal lines there to show ripples of like the water itself, that it does take an artistic liberty. And I know that, and I'm cool with that, but it's semi-inspired by a few things like watercolor, ink of the sort of Japanese style, especially in the trees as well. Like I've really enjoyed doing the brush strokes in the trees because they're just like little flicks, lots and lots of little flicks. Just keeping it quite simple, really. I actually really enjoyed the style, and I think I've said this now over multiple weeks of not letting go of a style until I'm done with it now. And I'm so on board with it. I'm finding it so much more comfortable. I'm actually curating content in a way that I'm feeling far more efficient in that sense as well. For example, I drew a snowy cottage that comes out on Patreon next month. And then part of how I did it, I was like, actually, I'd like to do a Christmas tree in this style. So I pre-recorded a YouTube one, which I never normally do, pre-recorded it for December. But it's in the same style. It follows the same sort of aesthetic. And at that point, I was like, now I'm done with it. I'm cool with this. And now I can move on and go from there. So we'll see that in a few weeks. But yeah, had fun with this one, as always. And I just like the kind of smudging of the wet sponge brush, I think it is, just to create those kind of cloudy.
It's really effective at creating that soft kind of cloudy, misty look. It's a really lovely aesthetic, isn't it? It really works, and it definitely does give the aesthetic of watercolor. And I know what you mean. There's, in terms of like mixing different styles together a little bit, but it's coherent though. It's still it generally gives that impression of watercolor. Because I guess some people use like gouache as well, traditional paint, which it can be, more watery, but that it can almost be more chalky and more grainy, like you've used for the actual tree foliage as well. So
Mm.
yeah, I think it's really lovely, really
Thank
nice.
you. But there's certain elements in there that were like very manual, you know, like just above the grass on the right hand side. Like we went back in with a layer afterwards and did a
Yeah,
soft airbrush and just a couple of light coats. Likewise in the tree as well. And
yeah,
this whole design actually looks quite kind of dull till like towards the latter stages where um we just add a layer and I've got a trio, maybe even four colors, just to use soft airbrush in the background, which towards
yeah.
the bottom area you can see more like yellows and peaches
Oh yeah,
and
yeah,
sort of colors in the background as like a general kind of wash to the
yeah,
background, which to me make it really colorful and kind of a little bit like what we were saying with Miko last week in our deep dive about how sometimes you maybe just need that little extra bit of color on YouTube
yeah.
anyway to make it kind of
True.
pop. So that was my YouTube release last week. My Patreon release last week was a 4-season tree design,
Yeah,
and it's split perfectly in the quadrants. And if the left hand side is a little bit tricky to see the actual split from the bottom left quadrant to top left, but you can see it mainly in the foliage. Um,
yes,
but the bottom left is spring. We've got some lovely little spring flowers in the ground as well. Some nice just wild flowers in there. A little bit of growth on the tree, nothing too much. And then top left is nothing but, like you said, that kind of really blue sky.
yeah,
Um, Lots of green, lots of vibrancy in the leaves. And then the right side is very exaggerative or exaggerating of the sort of the time of year, you know, very autumnal, super orangey yellow tones in there. A little bit more of a muted sky as it starts to turn into those kind of
yeah.
colder days. And then bottom right, of course, I've gone to town with blue leaves and
Snow as
blue
well. Yeah,
snowy kind of aesthetic, which I know again very exaggerative, but
that's
I think
nice.
it looks really cool. I'm really
Yeah,
happy with
yeah,
it. It's sometimes you make a design and you create it and you like it, you enjoy it, and this is one of those. I'm really happy with it, and I'm happy it's part of my catalog.
Mhm.
But the way it's received is far more than you ever anticipated. Like my patrons, I posted a sneak peek of this like I do normally, and then I then posted my YouTube one that you just saw above, and some of my patrons were like, "Wait a second, whoa, where's the 4-season tree?" I'm like, I leave dates in the caption every time. It comes out in a couple more days. Just it's okay. You can do this one in the meantime. But people
Don't
like
panic.
it was like they were coming for me with their pitchforks and were like, "Where is it? We want it
Yeah,
now."
yeah,
But it's when you hit with Patreon especially, you always kind of understand the vibe, don't you? You understand that
yeah.
they're not there to actually interrogate you. They're there for
No,
a good time
I'm just
and
very
you know,
keen. And that's
very
great, isn't it?
keen,
Yeah,
very enthusiastic, and it's
yeah.
always in a positive light. I never
Of
take it
course.
in a negative one.
No,
And
no.
so it was actually really funny to be like I'll be hunted down for not releasing it. But this is just I've actually realized, and you said exactly the same thing earlier. I've been drawing trees lately like crazy. Like
Yeah,
I've realized that almost every single design I've done recently has a tree in. But
yeah.
it's what we've also said multiple times of like perfecting certain things
Hmm.
as you go, like perfecting. And I say perfecting, you're never necessarily there, but perfecting the techniques anyway that you're doing at current stage. Like I
Yeah,
use the twig brush in the tree of the 4-season one to create the grooves and the twists and the contour of how the branches have just sprouted out and gone in that direction and then sprouted out in that way and showing the curve and how it bends
yeah,
the tree in those avenues. And I love doing it and coming down onto the roots as well. And it make trees can be so easily done in a flat way and
yeah.
not sort of 3-dimensional, a little bit more rounded. What I was just thinking, what brush did you use then for the tree in your tutorial as well? Because you've got that really beautiful kind of twisting of the branch, sorry, the tree trunk and then the
The tree
branches as well.
trunk. Um, I think it was just a soft brush for that in the end, and it
Oh,
was
nice.
just more manual. There's not a lot of texture to the actual bark, really. Yeah, I was just drawing the grooves on, and then a few taps with the like a medium airbrush. Yeah, there's not a lot to it. I'm going to have to work more into that on the extended one. So that's probably going to be something I do is to zoom in and add a little bit more grain to that bark. But it depends how prominent it is. Sometimes it's just not that prominent in the image. Whereas I think with yours, I think, it's not got as much in the background, so therefore the eye focus is slap bang in the middle on the tree trunk, doesn't it? So that is where your eye is directed to. But did you use the snow gum brush for the foliage? I'm looking at it and trying to
Yeah,
examine. Yeah.
it's a great brush. I love it.
It is good brush, yeah.
And just the little hues that you can get out of it, but you do need to pick the right tones to still like create that, like you said, like the far side of the tree in those dark tones, and then layering on the bright tones that are on our side of the tree, so you get that 3D nature to it of front to back.
Yes.
And it's something I say all the time in the tutorial, especially like with branches, overlap your lines, show that a branch, if you overlap branches, you show that they are in front of it potentially or behind it and going off in the direction you're facing, or they're coming towards you as well with the lines. So it's something I try to do. I mean, I've not done too much of it necessarily. I've noticed in the bottom left, but I mean, I didn't want tons of branches because the foliage is the key part to sell the seasonal part of it. So yeah, I'll leave links to all of our tutorials in the description down below. As we mentioned earlier on, if you want to become a member of the channel and get early access to the show, as well as support us and all the work that we do here, you can now hit the join button that is down below on the channel. James, thank you as always for an awesome conversation. It's another great episode, lots of important information for our viewers. As always, we will be back next week with another episode of the Sketchwave, back every Tuesday. In the meantime, you can come and follow us on our socials. There'll be links to them in the description down below, and we'll see you in the next one.